So I was 9 years old when Resident Evil came out on the original PlayStation, a little grey box. You can do your own math on how absolutely fucking ancient that makes me, by the way. And despite the game being rated for ages 15 and over, I'd pulled the ultimate grift on my mum and secured myself a copy. Actually, I'll be honest, it didn't take much grifting. Back in the mid-90s, adults just kind of assumed, like by default, that all games were made for kids. I mean, that age rating, it may as well have been a part of the box art. They were not paying attention to that. I became absolutely obsessed with the game, to the point that when I wasn't actively playing the game, I was drawing these absolutely nutty pictures of zombies doing generally nefarious zombie shit, like eating dead bodies, or simply just standing there with like the skin decaying off their face or their limbs kind of falling off. Removed from like any context, it was the kind of artistic expression that ends with my mum wondering if she should like take me to see a child therapist or something, and you know, like just locking the knife drawer to make sure that I don't murder my entire family in their sleep. I actually remember very vibrantly beaming about how I was drawing stuff from the game. So presumably she chalked it down to just weirdo kids being weird, and it was harmless. I mean, you'll be relieved to hear I didn't kill any of my family, so it all turned out fine. Mind you, that's what someone who did kill their family would say, isn't it? Resident Evil became this insanely formative game for me. Like I always credit Final Fantasy VII with blowing my mind like clear out of my ass. When it comes to like just showing me what games could be. But Resident Evil was the first game I played that was pure cinema.
Albert Wesker. Resident Evil.
I'd come like directly from Sega Mega Drive, aka Genesis for folks from, you know, over there or over. I'm not a cartographer, which means that not only did I choose my side poorly in the console wars, but I'd been raised around 2D games. I mean, yeah, towards the end of the generation, we got some pretty wild shit. Like on the Genesis, we got Virtua Racing, a game that very few people would remember. And then those kids on the greener side of the fence, they had Star Fox, which is a game much more of a contingent remember. But those were pretty unprecedented. Like quick shout out to Balls, which is a real game that actually existed and looks like this. You're probably looking at this footage and asking, is this a joke? Like, is this some elaborate bit that you're doing? It's not. This is a video game that was released for money. People paid money to buy and own this. I really miss the 90s, do you know what I mean? Compared to games from the previous era, the previous generation, Resident Evil was like seeing in color for the first time. Like it was like gazing upon the face of God. Only God in this instance was called Barry Burton.
A dining room.
The combination of like slightly awkward controls and Hitchcockian camera angles was on some next level shit, to be honest. Hitchcockian, is that a word? Did I just make up a word? Oh well. I'll see you in court, Merriam and/or Webster, whichever one of you word fascists wears the trousers in that relationship. So you'd enter like a tight, crooked space with a camera shot that artfully showed you 30% of the room, leaving the other 70% of the room obscured, which kind of forced you to push forward, which was not only like a really smart way of building tension, but it also added this like mini game of chicken to every new room that you found. There were probably numerous times as a kid that I entered I entered a room, heard like a weird shuffle, and then popped like a 180 inverted kickflip and just back the fuck off back to the door and out. Then I'd just take like 5 minutes to psych my dumb little kid brain back up to go back in and actually play the game. And this is without mentioning like the absolutely gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds that this game had. Because the camera was static, most of the backgrounds didn't require animation or modeling and could be made to just look incredibly detailed. It was an absolutely genius way of working within the limits of the hardware. And it's like, it's a thing that lasted the entire span of the generation. Loads of games did that same thing. 3 years after Resident Evil, that put us in 1999 now, a little gem called Silent Hill arrived. Just sort of crawled its way out of a cavity in the bathroom wall and kept the freak flag flying for all the little deviants like me. It kept hold of the cinematic camera angles, but wait for this, the camera moves now. No longer are the backgrounds pre-rendered, but now almost entirely 3D modeled. And the camera dynamically pans around the space instead of, holding on the same spot. It was an absolute bloody melon bender is what it was. I mean, it was scary enough when you had to push through a space that was static, but now the camera would do like trippy little whip pans and like follow the pro tag from like foot level, obscuring so much of like the background and the things around you. And it was just this whole new level of artistry that was really expressive. So a new thing that games were doing around that time was a fog or a mist to obscure things in the distance to sort of compensate for the lack of render distance they could be doing, which looked absolute dog shit in a lot of games. I'm thinking Superman 64 on Turok there. It looked like someone had just glazed the screen in Vaseline. It was horrid. But in Silent Hill, it actually made perfect sense that they would implement it, because it obscured so many of the monsters and things. Like, you could hear them in the distance. Your little radio or whatever would come up with static whenever you were close to a monster. And that limited draw distance actually made the game much more tense. The combo of limited visibility and the camera being as dynamic as it was, it gave Silent Hill this energy and pacing, like you were constantly being thrown forward through the world. The stillness of Resident Evil 1, it had this kind of comfort to it. Like, as unpredictable as every room was, you could rely on the scene to just sort of stand stoically, even if the enemies inside it didn't. But now the fucking camera had turned on me too. It was in on the joke and laughing at me and doing whatever the fuck it wanted. I'd be trying to navigate like an area and just hope that it didn't snap around to reveal some horrific monster. I sound kind of pissed or molding about it. I'm really not. It was incredible. It took an already intense way of curating a game space and just hooked it up to a car battery and started revving the engine. Silent Hill, much like Resident Evil, was absolutely the sum of its parts. Not only did it excel in visuals, but the music and the sound design is frankly in both unmatched to this day. I mean, I composed the words to this video listening to a save room playlist on Spotify. Every Resident Evil game, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, every Resident Evil game has save rooms, and every save room has this almost sort of ethereal, soothing music to it. which somehow is iconic in almost every game. And the fact that a game could have a single room in it that has its own iconic music that everyone remembers and thinks is amazing is in itself an incredible feat, to be honest. Jump forward now through time. We've gone past Resident Evils 1, 2, and 3, all coming to the PS1. Beyond Code Veronica, which is like the red-headed stepchild that Capcom keep in a basement and feed fish heads. We're past the incredible Resident Evil 1 remake, which is, you know, one of my favorite games of all time. Past Resident Evil 0, which is often slept on for pretty good reasons, but still pretty good. And all of these games are keeping the gorgeous cinematic horror gaming experience alive. I'm going to use cinematic horror for this to describe this like static background or like creative artistic background, dynamic cameras. Cinematic horror feels like it explains it, so I'm going to be using that term more in this video. Now, in that same span of time, Silent Hill kept trucking on. It released 2, 3, and 4 incredible games. 4's my personal favorite. Don't at me, I don't care if it's not the best one. 4 dropped in 2004. All of these are full tilt cinematic horror games. No, I give you a pass to at me if Silent Hill 4 is also your favorite Silent Hill game. But I don't want to hear the argument that Silent Hill 2 is, you know, it's actually the superior one. Like, I've seen the video. I know how it's good. I know it's a fantastic realization of a struggling spouse trying to support, you know, a partner in decline. I know all this. I've seen the same 4-hour videos that you have. But listen, check this out. Silent Hill 4 is about a dude who never leaves his apartment and kind of just quietly spies on his neighbors, all while his mental health steadily declines. You want to talk about a difficult, relatable story? I mean, come on. So we're in 2005. A game drops called Resident Evil 4 and changes everything. It sets the tone for an entire generation of games, but it also buries the genre that it came from. Capcom made that over-the-shoulder third-person view basically the de facto for the new games, breaking that streak like intermittently to go first person, but never like truly returning to its roots. Silent Hill reluctantly followed suit with more sort of, I'd say, fixed third-person angles. Like some of the time the camera will detach to show off a bit of the scene, but for the most part it was fixed, and it just kind of lacked the energy and the creativity that the earlier games had. Generally speaking, for the longest time, if you were a little cinematic tank control sicko like I was, like, you had very little to get your jollies on. And then after the longest drought, indie development began to kick in and emerge through platforms like Steam. And it gave coders and creators this opportunity to create games like the ones that I wanted, like the ones that they wanted. People with a similar fetish and sickness to me were able to now explore the cinematic horror genre and create new experiences for people. And we've been lucky enough to have games like Crow Country, Alyssa, however you say that, Signalis, which is great, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, Indica, Tormented Souls, The Medium, like loads of stuff, you know. Listen, don't shoot the messenger. It counts, you know. However you feel about it, The Medium counts. But as good as most of those games were, I still miss the craft and the atmosphere of earlier games. Like they were just incredibly well made and refined. Resident Evil 1 through 3 had like all this kitschy bombast that made it special. And then Silent Hill 1 to 4 took these huge swings on abstract storytelling and world building that totally left the player alone a lot of the time and sort of forced you to try and work out what you thought was going on. And honestly, I wonder in this time where like everything is focus tested and decided by sales projections and formulas and formats that have all like proven to be successful, I wonder if those big monoliths will ever go home, so to speak. I mean, they've got really no need to. That close, like, third person behind the shoulder view has worked so many times for so many games. I mean, you've got Resident Evils, you've got the new Dead Space, you've got Alan Wake 2, the most recent Alone in the Dark, the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake. All of these games use that same focus, that same third person over the shoulder view. And mainstream horror just seems beholden to that particular format. It maximizes sales potential by allowing people to play in a way that's totally familiar. And if not that, then it's first person, which is even easier to sell for people. You know, once again, I get it. You know, businesses want to make money, so why gamble when you can take a safe bet on something that keeps proving itself over and over again? But safety and familiarity are like antithetical to horror. They are the enemy of horror as far as I'm concerned. And the more games that come out looking like the last thing that hit, the more fatigued and less affected people are. Horror throughout history has made a point of pushing boundaries. It's kind of horror's whole thing, to be honest. Like, the genre has been at its most viral and best, honestly, when it's doing something challenging and new. Modern mainstream horror is fine. It's clearly doing well. We've seen the numbers. But as much as I love the big franchises I've mentioned, I've not touched the Resident Evil 4 remake or the Dead Space remake or even Alan Wake 2. And to be honest, I feel nothing really stirring up for the Silent Hill 2 remake, as much as that game is an all-time favorite for me. And I was trying to reconcile in my own head, like, why don't I feel particularly driven to play these games? Like, these are some of my favorite game series, and they're all they're reviewing really well, but I just I can't find the drive and the energy in me to be excited about these things, because when I see footage from these games, they all look very similar. They all look like they've been made from a similar mold, even if they're all telling wildly different stories. And I know it sounds reductive to say that simply the camera angle, simply the way that the game is presented to me is the thing that draws me away from it. But I can't help it. Like, as intimately familiar as I am with these franchises, I feel like I'm looking at the same game over and over and over again. I feel like I've been dooming for a minute now, and it's not something I enjoy doing. Like, I like to keep the spirits high, but I'm talking about something very near and dear to me. Like, I don't just want to sit here pissing and moaning about how much better things were 1,000 years ago. I do have some optimism about change. The cyclical nature of all things, of absolutely everything, just in itself would lead me to think that cinematic horror can have its day again. Fatigue for the familiar is like a very real thing, and nowhere more so than in gaming. Resident Evil is a franchise renowned for its ability to renew and bounce back. I talked about RE4 earlier and how, like, that was a reaction. The release of Resident Evil 4 was a reaction to decline in sales from the cinematic horror of, like, RE1, 2, and 3, and then Code Veronica. And it worked. I mean, they got the bag again. And then some years later, Resident Evil 7 was a reaction to that third-person formula that REs 4, 5, and 6 had. declining. I don't know if it was declining. I think interest was declining. Like creativity, people's impressions of the series was declining. I know they sold well. RE6 I know sold very well. But I think Resident Evil as a franchise was being seen as a bit B tier by the time Resident Evil 7 had been announced. So Resident Evil 7 became this answer to that, where they took the franchise in a direction they hadn't done since the cocaine days of Survivor on PlayStation 1. It was them going back to something. Plus, Capcom have been in this absolutely ridiculous renaissance for the past decade. I mean, shit, even their employees are treated well, which is sadly something worth mentioning. Now, honestly, I'd love to say that I see similar things for Silent Hill, but Konami are in full, fuck it mode and just sort of giving their properties to absolutely anyone with a half decent pitch, which sounds good on the surface. I mean, they let the series sit in IP jail for so long that them suddenly coming out and saying, hey, look, 4 games and a movie was kind of like water in the desert for people like me. But the 2 things released so far, Ascension and I was about to say Sharp Message. I mean, that would be fitting. Short Message, both seem very much at odds with the cerebral, subliminal nature of traditional Silent Hill storytelling.
Hi, sweetie.
I was scared today.
Add to that how watered down the concepts of Silent Hill 2 look. I mean, we've not played the game yet. They might have nailed it, but the eye test on Silent Hill 2 seems like they've taken a lot of the more raw and difficult to process aspects of Silent Hill 2 and just sort of sanded off the edges of it, which is really not something anyone wants from a Silent Hill 2 remake. I mean, ultimately it's starting to feel like Silent Hill 2, not Silent Hill 2, just Silent Hill, is a name that you can loosely attach to anything sort of horror. I think maybe that's how Konami see the franchise, which again, in principle, isn't an entirely bad thing. I mean, I would rather people took swings at something to do with Silent Hill than we just never ever get anything Silent Hill related. But at the same time, I feel like the more the franchise gets pimped out, the more diluted and fractured and, faded both the originals and the concepts and ideas behind the originals become. But all that said, Silent Hill F looks fucking sick. Thank you for watching my internet video. I didn't intend for this to be as doom and gloom as it perhaps ended up sounding at points. Honestly, horror games are kind of in a better place now than they've ever been. I think everyone's eating good. It's just the food that everyone's eating is food that I'm not particularly in the mood for or hungry for, which is, I guess that's just a me problem. I essentially have to drive to like the other side of town to this small takeout place that only opens once a month for the food that I'm into. But hey, that's fine. At least I get to eat it every so often, Like and share and subscribe and shout and scream and, do a little provocative dance if you found some value in this video. It does help minuscule channels like mine, get some visibility. So it's very much appreciated if you do. And hopefully I'll see you next time.